Everyone is doing well this evening. This is the Canadian Foreign Policy Hour, and I am Yves Engler. Canadian Foreign Policy Hour is a critical look at Canada's role internationally, weekly session. I'm coming to you from Jojage, which has long been a meeting place of various First Nations, otherwise known as Montreal. And there are a lot of developments in Canadian foreign policy this week. First off, the Rwandan court barred main opposition candidate Victor. I'm forgetting how to pronounce her last name. Ingabire, who would have seriously threatened Paul Kagame's rule. And it's just further confirmation of the dictatorship in Rwanda. In Niger, the military, a few months ago, 4 months ago, I think in December maybe, they kicked out French forces from the country. And now it looks like they have kicked out American forces from the country. And of course, Canadian troops seem to have been removed in recent months. There was fairly significant Canadian training taking place in the country. There's a story on the Maple, the cenotaph honoring SS veterans won't return to Oakville Cemetery. I talked about this last week briefly. It was a little unclear, but now it looks confirmed. They won't be returning this Nazi war monument, a cemetery in Oakville outside of Toronto. On the question of Ukraine, the Canadian media continues, I talked about this last week, continues to sort of push this hard line position that the French President Macron seems to have taken up. So the National Post this week published an editorial saying Macron shows the way on Ukraine. And Macron, of course, has raised now twice sending NATO troops into Ukraine, which would potentially drastically escalate that war. There's a good interview, interesting interview with Bob Ray, Canada's ambassador to UN, that the Jurist published with Pitsania, who published a documentary, very good series of documentaries on Canadian foreign policy. It's a long interview with Bob Ray. Gets very angry because he actually knows the subject, and he pushes back on Bob Ray on the question of Palestine, on the question of Haiti, on the question of their position on Ukraine, and other issues. And Bob Ray gets quite clearly, gets very openly kind of like frustrated or belligerent. There's a story in the Globe, I think on Saturday, and it was about plastics problems, and talk basically about how their plastics are far less recyclable than is sort of often presented. And I forget the exact numbers, but it's like more than 90% of plastics are just a single use. And the international dimension to this is that under the Basel Convention, Canada has committed, after a big controversy a couple of years ago where tons of Canadian waste was appearing in the Philippines and was kind of like, I think it was stuck ashore in like a boat for like a year or something like that. And under pressure, finally the government signed the convention around the exportation. And so basically the story, mostly focused on the lack of recyclability of plastics, but also talks a bit about where the Canadian plastics are actually going. And basically it suggests that there are still significant amounts of Canadian plastic that's being basically dumped elsewhere and not being properly accounted for, and probably appearing in different more impoverished countries as our sort of like waste bin. Mining Watch reported on a Canadian mining company, Red Eagle, that lost a case in Colombia, suing the Colombian government for protecting important watershed and opposing its mining. and the company took them to international tribunal. But fortunately, the Colombian government won, but they spent more than $3 million in legal fees of fighting the Canadian mining company. In a bigger, similar case, a positive one, they often go in the wrong way here, Gabrielle Resources, their $4.4 billion US suit of Romania. This suit began like 8 years ago, and they lost. They lost in the international tribunal. And in the story about this international tribunal that fortunately ruled against the Canadian mining company, is big, huge controversy. There's like documentary done on the protests against the mining operation. It hasn't received much attention in recent years because like I said, the suit began like 8 years ago. But in this story, the Financial Post had a big long story about this defeat, which it had a huge effect on the Toronto Stock Exchange, the whole commodities section. I think they said it was an incredible number. It was like almost like 10% of the whole commodities section of the Toronto Stock Exchange got hit by this ruling, because I think they expected the company to win, and the stock of the Gabrielle Resources had gone up a lot in recent weeks, expecting, I guess, a different decision. Anyways, in the Financial Post story about this, which talks about how Canada signed all these foreign investment agreements with different countries to protect Canadian mining companies since mostly through the early 2000s. It says that Canadian companies had launched 67 of these arbitrations since 1999. So 67 different times suing in other countries taking them to the international tribunal for lost profit, which is quite the number. And this whole process, right? These foreign investment agreements, it's totally odious. It's a way of like superseding state laws, right? And giving corporations one more tool. They already have too much power, and giving them one more tool to protect their profits and their interests. On a different subject, David Puglisi reported that the speech by the head of the Canadian military from March 7th, advocating for openness on defense issues, is now secret, and that to get access to this speech, Puglisi, the Ottawa Citizen reporter, had to submit a request under the Access to Information Law. So the head of the military gives a speech about how we have to open up to more scrutiny and be more democratic as an institution. And then after he gives a speech, the military makes this secret and says, if you want to read the speech, you have to put in an access to information request. And this just speaks to just how secretive, how authoritarian, undemocratic, you want to call it, the military is. And there's a long history. I detail it. Puglisi knows better than anyone this, of course. There's innumerable examples of the military claiming documents didn't exist when they clearly existed after they've been put through access to information requests. All kinds of, the Somalia scandal, and they refused to release documents, even though there was actually a royal commission on it. It's an endless stream of these stories about how the military operates in a very undemocratic kind of way. Now, in the Financial Post, in the Globe and Mail, the report on business on Saturday, maybe Friday, I forget what day the article was in there. There's a story that this commentator says Canada's promise to NATO collides with spending increases for retirees. And the basic point of the story is that if Canada wants to get to the 2% of GDP, it really has to just chop at pensions. He's basically saying that, yeah, we can get rid of the daycare, $10 a day daycare initiative. the farmer care initiative, we can get rid of all this, but that's not going to be enough money, and we got to have to go at pensions. And he seems fairly sympathetic to that position. And of course, this is what militarists want, right? It's literally, do you want to spend on people having ability to retire, or do you want to spend on the latest weaponry so we can engage with the U.S. empire bid to dominate the world? And in the Le Journal this week or this month, their print issue, which I just read a couple of days ago, they have a story which actually dates, it's from back during the Harper time, but it's from a story from Frappru, the housing rights group here in Montreal, and where they did a calculation when the F-35 fighter jet was initially being sought after by the Harper government, and they found that you could build 6,400 social housing units for every single F-35 that you purchased, right? And so I think we're doing 65 F-35s, I think, or is it 88? I'm forgetting now. I'm sure we have, I think it's 65 or 88. That's the plan. And this is incredible amount of social housing. I don't know. I can't say for sure this is true, but clearly it's in the thousands of social housing units per fighter jet. So we can either not buy any of these fighter jets and build a whole lot of social housing. We could buy half of the number of the fighter jets and build, a decent amount of social housing. We could buy a quarter, whatever, on and on, how you want to look at this. But these are real calculations that, where do we put the social resources that our society has? On a different subject, the sort of China, we have to get rid of anything to do with China technology stuff is really ramping up. And this week is a whole bunch of examples. So the Globe and Mail published this piece about how the BC government is on board, the NDP BC government and the NDP federally as well, actually, according to the story, are on board for this fear mongering about cranes that they use at the Vancouver port, and that these cranes are possibly just a tool for the Chinese. I guess they were built in China, and they are a tool for the Chinese government, or could be a tool for the Chinese government to spy on us. And this is based upon something I think mentioned variation of this. I've seen stories about this in the Wall Street Journal, U.S. publications. That's been kind of a story brewing in the U.S., and the Globe talks about the U.S. Fears on this matter. Then, of course, we have this, the U.S. Congress voted a bill that moves towards banning TikTok. And because it's a Chinese-based company, even though apparently 60% of it's owned by U.S. capitalists. And so there's a whole push to ban TikTok. And now there was a story that came out. One was Ottawa reveals TikTok has been under security review since last fall. So the Canadian government, I think like 6 months ago, began this security review of TikTok, and they're now boasting that they're ahead of the curve because the Americans are moving towards banning TikTok. And the Globe editorial published the editorial board published "Don't Dither on the Dangers of TikTok." And in this editorial, they call for banning TikTok, of course, but they also point out, they made the claim, every country needs to be wary of China, right? So Uganda needs to be wary of China. Guatemala needs to be wary of China. Uruguay needs to be wary of China. Now, fine. I think it's probably good for every country to be wary of every other country. But I think that you find that there's a whole bunch of countries in this world that they're worried about China. Haiti's worried about, they got much bigger worries with the U.S., with Canada, with France, quite frankly, even now with Caribbean countries, Brazil, a whole bunch of countries, Spain, UK, that much bigger worry than China is. But this is where we're at with the Globe. Let's just put this in the editorial, don't even think twice about it. Simultaneously, though, The Intercept published a piece titled "TikTok Threat is Purely Hypothetical. U.S. Intelligence Admits." So they're just saying they could. We have no evidence they have. The Chinese government has used TikTok to spy. They could. So there's that. But also with this breaking relations with China push in the Globe and Mail specifically, they published an editorial, an op-ed today titled "How Canada Can Better Combat Uyghur Forced Labor." In the concerns that Canadian and Canada has combating Uyghur forced labor, even if we believed all of the claims of those with saying the Uyghur forced labor, it is very low down on the lists of concerns for Canada. Nonetheless, that's where the Globe's putting their emphasis. And this was based upon a couple days before, I think on Wednesday or Thursday, the Globe published a story titled "U.S. Seeks Joint Effort in Curbing Forced Labor Imports." And the U.S. envoy, basically to curb products from China, I don't have her name in front of me here. She visited Canada and basically said Canada should join this bid to target any product that might come from Xinjiang region. But it's not just the Xinjiang region. They're also saying that Tibetans are forced labor with Tibetans, forced assimilation and the like. And so we also have to, it's not really clear, I don't where exactly, but we need to be also worrying about products from China that Tibetans might have any role in producing. And this envoy also said Canada should consider travel ban on Chinese officials implicated in forced assimilation of Tibetans. So this is where we're at. Again, this is more of this China threat hyping. The Terry Glavin in the National Post had this piece titled "The Elephants in the Room." And then the sub headline was "Shades of the Bund in Beijing's Interference." And basically what he argues in the latter part of the op-ed, which begins on the front page of the National Post, is that there's this Mandarin-speaking Chinese Canadian community that's more recent, unlike the Hong Kongers, the Cantonese-speaking, which was the dominant community in Vancouver area specifically until recent years, and tends to be more critical of China, but that the Mandarin-speaking sorry about that, background noise here, but that the Mandarin community in Mandarin-speaking community in Vancouver and elsewhere, Toronto area, whatever, that they are the same as the Bund, the German Bund. I didn't know much about this. I looked it up very briefly. Basically, and he talks about 1930s. This was a pro-Hitler movement that was in Canada and the U.S. And maybe elsewhere as well, but some element in Canada. And he's basically saying that this Mandarin-speaking Chinese Canadian community is equivalent to that. But then he says that unlike the Bund, the pro-Nazi German Canadian movement in the 1930s, that this community actually has the Mandarin-speaking actually has influence with people in power. And then he says, Glavin says that he's got to raise these concerns about this and the foreign interference inquiry before the Trudeau government outlaws this, because there's new hate crimes legislation, which I think I'm opposed to. It seems like I agree with Glavin on this. I don't know what the bill is 63 or something, but the new bill to criminalize hate speech, but that he has to raise this before that becomes law because it would be made illegal. So he's kind of implying that it would be considered hate speech to refer to Mandarin-speaking Chinese Canadian community as an equivalent to Nazi supporters in the 1930s, German Canadian Nazi supporters in the 1930s. nonetheless, that's again where we're going with this whole China inquiry, foreign interference inquiry. This week, the media, the seeing this sort of Zionist movement and their like crying victim as they support slaughter in Palestine is something that's I always find very hard to accept, and it enrages me. Another issue that I would say is right equivalent that enrages me is the coverage of Haiti. And when it gets going at a time like this, and you see this one after another of these media reports that claims to be sort of sophisticated, claims to sort of be a backgrounder type thing, and it's just you can. I think it's very legitimate. You can say Haitian political system is dysfunctional. Haitian politicians are corrupt. You can make all these claims. I think there's lots of legitimacy of those claims, but then they just completely omit I would say the central, but at minimum, a significant factor in understanding all this, which is, of course, the U.S. and more importantly, in our case, Canada's role in the dysfunction and the chaos in Haiti. And just yesterday, one example. Yesterday, that global news is that Mercedes Stevenson, I think is her name, prominent journalist. She does that West Block. So she does a program, good 15-20 minute thing. And I think the headline is Canada's role in supporting Haiti as violence engulfs Port-au-Prince. Okay, so she has two guests on. Who are her two guests? Her guests are Canada's ambassador in Haiti and Canada's ambassador to the UN, right? So we get two different perspectives here on the Canadian government position towards what's going on in Haiti. And of course, like the central critique that she has, kind of underlying the whole thing. There's no history, of course, no history of Canada's role in Haiti. This beyond like we try to help out. The central underlying critique is we haven't been doing enough. The Americans asked us to take on the mission, and we didn't do it, and now there's chaos in Haiti. That's the central kind of like theme, which is an completely a completely whitewashing, if you like, of the history of Canada's role, and it's just highly ignorant, right? I mean, just a simple level that we appointed the guy who's been overseeing the thing to in the dissent over the last 3 years. So it takes very little knowledge about what's going on to puncture some pretty significant holes in that line of questioning. In the Globe, so there's been tons of stories on Haiti this week, just tons of stories. In the Globe, the op-ed page published that guy, I forget his name, they publish him regularly. He's a sort of liberal imperialist, humanitarian imperialist guy. And so this column says, as many as 80 tough gangs of murderers, rapists, and pillagers have taken control of the Haitian capital of Port-au-Prince, its airport, and just about anything that dares to move throughout the city and its suburbs. Those voracious gang members, many of them high on Colombian crack and Mexican fentanyl. It would be okay if they were high on Canadian crack or on U.S. fentanyl, but it's Colombian crack and Mexican fentanyl to really make it sound like it's a bad situation. This is just, I mean, it's not quite as bad as those stories floating around there about the cannibalism that they're claiming of these gangs. And then later in the column, he says, not wanting to take the task on themselves, Washington and Ottawa have outsourced the saving of Haiti, right? The saving of Haiti. But this is supposed, and of course, nothing about anything that's relevant to a Canadian reader to understanding Canada's role in Haiti. That's just completely omitted from the Globe and Mail. just like it's emitted from Global News, Mercedes Stevenson, and similar, slightly different dynamic. Maybe, in Le Devoir, a little bit more knowledgeable about Haiti, because, of course, French media covers it much more closely than English media does. So Talifière, Guy Talifière, who's a lead kind of international affairs columnist in Le Devoir, who was horrible around the 2004 coup, horrible coverage, and covered it fairly significantly. But became much better in the last couple of years with criticizing Canada's role in propping up Jovenel Moïse and the core group and stuff like that. He has this passage in an otherwise not a very a very ignorant column. He says, il y a eu les tontons macoutes des Duvalier, les chimères de l'ex-président Jean-Bertrand Aristide, et il y a maintenant les gangs fédérés autour du puissant Go et Famille, and then Jimmy Cherizet. So basically saying is there was the gangs of Duvalier, the Tonton Macoute, the gangs of Aristide, the Chimère, and now the current gangs. Now, the obvious question you have to ask anyone who says the Chimère gangs of Aristide is who led the Chimère, right? Who led the Chimère? Now, the Tonton Macoute, we know who led the Tonton Macoute. It was a whole structure, right? We got Lafont, we have Barbeau. It was a paramilitary structure. It had a whole hierarchy, right? People who were members. That doesn't exist with the so-called Chimère of Aristide, because the Chimère of Aristide is a propaganda formulation of the Haitian elite and the imperial forces as a way to demonize the elected government that never needed arms to maintain its rule. It wanted everything to do with not using arms, right? That's why they disbanded the military. That's why they, it was a relatively small police force. They had popular support. And so the fact that Talifière is still contributing to this propaganda, as if it's all the same of Duvalier's, Macoute, Aristide, Chimère. Yeah, there were gangs that supported Aristide. Yes, Cité Soleil, the biggest slum in the country, almost everyone supported Aristide, and there were gangs there. and gang members understood, just like today, I should say. I think the gangs that are terrorizing Haiti today are, terrorizing slum neighborhoods and predominantly poor people, but they are kind of anti-imperialist and anti-rich and anti-Ariel Henry rhetoric is partly based upon the fact that this is a way that they know that the population believes that, and this is a way to develop some degree of legitimacy, whatnot, just like the gangs that existed in particularly in Port-au-Prince during Aristide's time did, said they were supportive of the government because their whole communities were supportive of the government. And so this is another type, this a slightly more sophisticated part of the propaganda, but it's really it's a real crime, ideological crime, to try to make that claim. Another one, Le Devoir published a piece from Denis Coderre, who was Paul Martin's former mayor of Montreal, minister in the Liberal government, Paul Martin's special advisor on Haiti during the coup. I mean, this is like Denis Coderre has the right to talk about how this great Haitian Canadian community deserves Canada taking this more seriously. This is kind of the point of his piece. And I mean, this is, Denis Coderre, should be locked up for what he did on Haiti. And Le Devoir, which, should be, or sort of is, the most left-wing daily in the country, this is where they're at, giving you a sign of, the propaganda on Canada's role in Haiti. On Palestine, there's a horrible staggering one that came out a few days ago. The UN representative said there were more Palestinian children killed in a bit more than 4 months of Israeli onslaught as there were in 4 years of all the other wars in the world combined. And we're seeing all these stories coming out about, they're saying now no babies being born in Gaza that's actually proper weight. And I just saw one saying more than a third of those under 2 years are already malnourished, and just more and more stories about children, the horrors for children in Gaza, and obviously the population in general. Just now, last 24 hours or so, Israel's again attacking the Al Shifa hospital, where there was apparently around 20,000 people. They attacked, beat the Al Jazeera crew that was covering this, and detained them. They apparently have released some of them. So the slaughter continues. But there's many developments on this issue in the Canadian context. First of all, both Le Devoir and the Montreal Gazette reported on these two survivors of October 7th who were brought to Montreal and did the whole big sob story. Oh, no one talks about the horrors of October 7th. They say this stuff with a straight face, and this appears in the front page of the Montreal Gazette and in Le Devoir. Again, this I'm sure was a sponsored tour, and just about how the media system works, and those who have resources to bring people from afar to do these press conferences. Of course, this part of how the bias in the media plays out. Honest Reporting Canada announced a list of Canadian campus media fellows, students from 14 different universities, who each get $1,000 to monitor articles in campus media and write articles. So they publish in like the student paper, Concordia, McGill, or Toronto Metropolitan University, whatever, and they're paid for this. And there's a whole structure that pushes this. The Canadians for Justice and Peace in the Middle East tweeted out a statement about how South Africa's foreign minister said that dual nationals serving in the IDF, that they will be criminally liable for war crimes and will be arrested upon entering South Africa. And so they're saying they're repeating their ask of Canada's Justice Minister to investigate Canadians in the IDF, but they're not responding. The Hill Times reported that CIJA, Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs, Representative David Cooper is on the list of the top 100 lobbyists in Canada, most influential lobbyist list. Cooper worked at the Israeli embassy for 5 years. So this is somebody, talk about foreign interference. The Maple published a piece titled "A Timeline of Anti-Palestinian Violence and Threats in Canada," which just details about a dozen, I think it was, cases of violence against Palestine Solidarity people over the last 5 months. So we hear all about the Zionists being attacked and the anti-genocide, thugs and all this kind of stuff. But in fact, if you look into it, the cases of individuals who've been arrested, it's only cases of people who are arrested or charged that they detail, or it's actually biased in the other direction. On the arms question, we have the Maple also published a story about 2 Liberal MPs break ranks, call for Israel arms embargo. The Trudeau government announced, they seem to have leaked this, probably the Toronto Star and CBC, and they're saying they've basically been slow moving with arms permits for 30 armored vehicles to sell to Israel from a Canadian company. This is probably being leaked because they've been under a lot of criticism on the issue. On Sunday, yesterday, a synagogue here in Montreal, the Shari Zedek Synagogue, hosted this event where it says Shari Zedek introduces Canadian hero of the IDF on the front line. Staff Sergeant Noy Lieb, 32-year-old from Calgary, who detailed his 100+ days of helping the genocide in Gaza. So this event also had Israel's Consul General here in Montreal. And basically, this is some Calgarian who apparently was working in New York when at October 7th, and he goes back to Israel and wants to get a piece of the action of killing Palestinian babies. And so they bring them to the synagogue, sponsor this, host it, da da da, and it's outrageous. It's outrageous. Fortunately, without any public announcement, there were 40 people who rallied there last night in about a 24-hour period. And I think it's really important to normalize the idea that wherever genocide enablers gather, they're going to be protesting. And it doesn't matter if it's a synagogue, it's Jewish community institution, a Jewish school, that there's going to be protests. And this business of centering Jewish sensitivities is just, no, sorry, while you're celebrating genocide, that's not, we're not having it. And there's obviously, people probably saw, there's a big push. So 2 weeks ago, there was a protest. Concordia refused to hold these Israeli soldiers, 3 Israeli soldiers, and it was ended up doing it at a Jewish community center in western part of the city of Montreal. And there was a protest. And then the next day, a synagogue hosted the Israel Real Estate Fair. And also there was one in Thornhill, 2 of them in Thornhill in Toronto area at a synagogue, selling properties in Israel, basically celebrating the genocide and selling like properties including in illegal settlements. And there were protests, rightfully so, and there was a big, huge kerfuffle about it. In Montreal, they got a judge to bring in a 10-day injunction saying there could be no protests near the synagogue or the community center. So the synagogue and community center can bring in any war criminal they want, and you're not allowed to say we shouldn't be having war criminals speaking. And then they went on Friday. They went to try to get that injunction extended, and it targets independent Jewish voices, Palestinian Youth Movement, Montreal for Palestine, and a couple others. And it's outrageous. It's totally outrageous. And today, the mayor of Vaughan, Del Duca, he announced that Vaughan is going to try to bring in something banning protests within 100 meters of religious institutions, schools, and community centers. Entirely flowing out of this, right? As Desmond Cole pointed out on Twitter, that means that students who go to a school, as this happened 2 or 3 weeks ago in Montreal, there was a protest at the school. I went to it, but maybe 100 people showed up. That was because the school was deeply anti-Palestinian, and parents and students from the school organized this protest against the school. So that presumably students of a school couldn't protest their school being anti-Palestinian, because that could be defined as hate, according to what Vaughan is trying to, the mayor of Vaughan is, the suburb of Vaughan, trying to bring forward. And this is more of, I've been talking about this, the authoritarianism of Zionism, the fascistic dimension we're seeing of the Zionist movement here in Canada. One of the things on the synagogues that I hadn't understood, so as these synagogues are being turned into places of like glorifying genocide, it's important to note that the synagogues don't, as do churches and other religious institutions, their charity status doesn't just give them the ability to write tax credits for donations and the ability to not pay sales tax. It also gives, apparently, and I was just reading up on this, don't know much about it, apparently pastors and presumably also rabbis get like a special tax category where they get to basically like write off different things, and basically it seems like pay lower tax rate, personal tax rate than the common person. But more importantly, they don't pay property taxes, right? So these institutions that are hosting these war criminals that are killing people in Gaza, they get this huge subsidy by the city government level, provincial government level, federal government level, and now there's a whole push to make it so you're not even allowed to protest in front of these institutions when there's war criminals being brought there, and there's I'm doing this piece in response to this like anarchist publications, this anonymous article criticizing the protest that happened in front of the synagogue in Montreal a couple of weeks ago. And he basically, the essence of his critique is that there's Jewish anarchists that are being alienated by this protest in front of the synagogue against the real estate fair. And to my mind, he's just contributing to this fear that leads to the anti-genocide, anti-apartheid movement not challenging a whole bunch of institutions that deserve to be challenged. And so, for instance, the biggest private school in the country, Tannenbaum Chat, about more than 1,000 students, Toronto High School, it has, as I think I've probably mentioned before, it has IDF days where they ask the kids to wear IDF shirts, where they fundraise for the Israeli military. And this is all in the open, right? This is not, and have Israeli emissaries that are seconded to the school. They come live in Toronto for a year, and they're at the school like multiple days, and they promote Israel, And this is it's an outrage that there's never been a protest at this school. But not even has there never been a protest. As far as I know, no group in this country has ever put out a statement criticizing the fact that Tannenbaum Chat has IDF days, or that it's like, whole ethos is deeply anti-Palestinian. So we have to normalize the notion that you're going to hold IDF days, you're going to celebrate people slaughtering Palestinians in Gaza. There's going to be protests. And yet there's still, so-called radical leftists who claim they're pro-Palestinian that concern themselves with the sensitivity of Jewish anarchists over protesting in front of a synagogue than they do with the infinitely greater issue of justice, which is Canada, and in this case, a synagogue and or other institutions' contribution to this genocidal slaughter taking place. Now, I've gone on too long, but I still had a couple other things I want to get to real quickly. The NDP motion in the House of Commons today, this looks really good. I'm seeing, I haven't watched it, but I read some reports. The motion's not wonderful, but it's some good stuff in there. Notably, of course, the arms embargo, recognizing Palestine, total panic from the Zionist lobby, from Benny Gantz, said he called the most popular politician to be next prime minister of Israel, said he called Trudeau to complain about this, to vote against it. The Israeli embassy put out a statement criticizing it. B'nai B'rith put out a civil society statement, a supposed civil society statement, condemning it, signed by all these different groups and figures. So there's a big panic over it. What they're saying online that I saw just before starting is that the Bloc Québécois has now said they are going to all vote for it. So they got the NDP all voting for it. A number of Liberal MPs have said they're going to vote for it. I think it'd be stunning if it passed. It's very unlikely because apparently cabinet is going to vote against it. But if it even gets close to passing, that would be a huge, huge success. Tens and tens of thousands of people emailed Liberal MPs calling them. So it's really rattling. The National Post, Toronto Sun, it's condemnations all over the right wing. But there's also, some better pieces. The CBC today published a piece. Evan Dyer, who's terrible on Latin America and lots of issues, but on Palestine seems to be, for the corporate media is not bad. He points out one thing in this piece about the NDP motion, which is that 3 different Liberal foreign ministers have written to the International Court of Justice or the International Criminal Court asking it to refuse Palestinian cases, partly on the grounds that Israel does not recognize the court. I didn't know that. I mean, I did know that some of that happened, but I hadn't. The three different ministers, just another sign of just how anti-Palestinian the Trudeau government has been, and this motion is bringing some of this stuff to the fore, which is very important stuff to be discussed. So it's a big news item. Hopefully, I think tonight it will be a top item on the national and the broadcasts. Lots of coverage, which is good. And I think we'll also see some of the campaigns that are planning on targeting specific Liberal MPs, specifically here in Montreal. The tourism minister and environment minister, who are both in ridings, they won by very small margins, and they're very left-wing ridings, fairly significant sympathy for Palestine. Them voting against this resolution is going to give a lot of ammunition to the campaigns that have been basically begun to, it's ways off the election, but to basically work to unseat those ministers, Guilbeault and Ferrada, on the grounds that they contributed to the genocide. So there's some positives that will come out of that. Now, just to conclude quickly before the questions, and I don't want to go on too much past 7 o'clock, is that the popular uprising, I mean, it continues, and lots of different examples of this. The unions here in Quebec, a bunch of social groups that publish a full-page ad in the Le Devoir calling for a big demo next Saturday. There's, of course, been 25 weekends in a row of mass demonstrations, about 1,000 on Sunday. I suspect if it's okay weather next Saturday, there will be multiple thousands here. On a short notice, there was a protest here. About 70 people showed up to a Liberal fundraiser where there were supposed to be 7 ministers. Only reported 1 minister appeared. Maybe others that got in somehow, but there's people who were there for 2 hours, way before it was supposed to start, and way into when it had begun. And we only 1 reported minister seen. Another in Toronto, on Friday there was a protest. Trudeau reportedly had to flow out the back, huge police presence. Montreal, huge, like 50 cops, riot squad, all these vans, protecting all the different entrances to this hotel restaurant that they were having the fundraiser at. Same thing in Toronto, the hotel. Tons and tons of riot squad, horses. And apparently Trudeau had to escape from a back entrance. In same thing on Friday in the St. John in New Brunswick, Poilievre had a fundraiser with the premier, and there were dozens and dozens of people that were protesting inside, just not inside the event, but inside the building where the event was taking place. I posted this thing from I think March 4th or 5th. Trudeau on a ski hill. When Trudeau went skiing, he's snowboarding, and he gets confronted, and a couple of people confront him on Palestine and video it while he's snowboarding. So even when he goes off to the ski mountains, the popular uprising is reaching Trudeau. So this is it continues. Scotiabank on Friday there were protests at multiple Scotiabanks because of their investment in Elbit, the big Israeli arms company. And at least one story I saw, Courtney, BC, they shut the Scotiabank down. Multiple stories of other Scotiabanks. So the mobilization continues. So that's obviously great. And final note from me before people comments and questions is that I begin this the mini tour for the Canada's Long Fight Against Democracy on Thursday in Ottawa at the Happy Goat Coffee Shop. I listed the different tour stops: Waterloo, Toronto, Hamilton. After that, beginning the week after, and then Owen Schock, the co-author, is doing something in Saskatoon. I believe it's April 11th, and I'll probably be out in the West Coast in June. And people contacting me from elsewhere. Kingston just got in touch, wanting to set up something sooner. So please do come out, share information about it, which is on my website. And if people have comments, questions, I will make Laura the co-host, and go ahead, Catherine and Laura. I think I've made you co-host. Yeah, I've made you co-host, and I think I've unmuted you, Catherine.
Sorry about that. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yeah.
No. Oh, okay. Oh, okay. Yeah, sorry. I just wanted to give you a little update on the thing about CBC not policy about covering genocide or mentioning genocide. I did make a access to information request and got the results back, which has a letter that was sent to an internal letter sent to CBC people, employees, that was all blanked out except for the person who sent it. And then the rest of it was just some response. There was one letter from a listener, and then responses to.
We lost you, Catherine. If you are there, Catherine, if you were able to send this to me in an email, I'd like to share it. I mean, even the fact that if CBC's is blanking out their correspondence on this, that in of itself, I think, is of interest.
Okay, Jake, go ahead. Jake? Jake, you're unmuted. You should be able to speak. Okay, there seems to be a problem with Jake. Okay. Well, okay, now you're muted, Jake. Jake, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, you're on. Please ask your question.
Okay, this is in regard to TikTok.
Okay.
Within the last few days, I mean, TikTok now became the enemy #1 of the West and US and going to destroy the whole Western world, right? Well, in the last few days, I heard from 3 different sources that actually the main players here are Israel and the Jewish lobby, the billionaires and so on in US. Because TikTok is the only one that's not removing anything that is not favorable to Israel. And that outrageous the Jewish lobby and Israel, and they want to buy it actually. And they actually put few clips of that Greenblatt, their head of ADL, and Schumer and others, that they saying that TikTok is no good for the Jews, is no good for Israel, and we have to do something about it and so on. So this whole thing is cooked by Israel and the Jewish billionaires.
Yeah, I wouldn't say. I think that's overplaying the issue. This begins as a China thing, but there's no doubt about it. The Wall Street Journal had a story where they detail this out very clearly, that basically after October 7th, there was a whole bunch of data showing that TikTok, the different tags that were like, if I stand with Palestine versus I stand with Israel, was like the tags that I stand with Palestine was like 100 million, and I stand with Israel is like 1 million. And then a whole bunch of other, Palestine, Israel. And so basically the people who use TikTok, it's not the algorithm, the way they frame it is the algorithm was pro-Palestinian. But in fact, what it is that basically young people are pro-Palestinian, and they use TikTok to share, correct, broadly speaking, not every case, I'm sure, but broadly speaking, correct information about the horrors that Israel's committing, and also about, context and whatever. And it reinforced the fact that, younger people are pro-Palestinian. And so the story, Wall Street Journal story shows, I looked into the guy, I'm forgetting his name, what the group he was, but the person who kind of got the ball back rolling. The bid to target TikTok had basically stopped 8 months ago, 6, 7, 8 months ago, and then last little bit they reinvigorated this campaign, and the guy who reinvigorated it, according to the Wall Street Journal, very openly aggressive Zionist, nothing hidden about that. He says it himself that it was highlighting the Israel element that is what was able to relaunch this campaign that had stalled politically. Yeah, so there's no doubt that a bid to shut down criticism of Israel is a important factor. Now, having said that, just on a personal level, I haven't engaged with TikTok hardly at all. But I have said I'm obviously on Twitter a lot. I used to be on Facebook a lot. I'm not very much anymore because I found that Facebook would become almost totally apolitical. But I have an Instagram and TikTok account. Now, when I initially, so when I posted a lot of the kind of questioning politicians and disruptions, whatever stuff, to all these accounts, because I'm like, well, why not? And some of them, I I actually built up, like, quite without basically ever being on Instagram or TikTok, built up a fairly significant following. And some of them got like really wide, like hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands, million. A couple of them are even into the million views. But the only one that I've ever had anything taken down from, I think one time I remember having, I think I used the F word on Twitter, and I got like something saying you're not allowed to, or something to that effect. The only thing I've ever taken down is on TikTok, and I've had a multiple Israel-related interventions, or I don't even remember what they all were, just taken off. And so the same thing, I will have posted Instagram, or posted Facebook, or posted Twitter. Nothing happens. It's, they allow it, but TikTok takes it down. And I think basically what was going on there is TikTok, because they've been under such pressure, have actually really tried to clamp down on Palestine solidarity stuff. But despite that, this push to go after them. Yeah, there's no doubt that Palestine is part of it. But I think it's really the merging of this anti-China with this anti-Palestinian kind of dynamic.
Okay, Ellen, go ahead.
Yeah, just one short question, Eve. I suppose that donations to your program don't have charitable status in front of the CRA.
No, and I very much doubt. I very much doubt the CRA will.
I didn't think that was the case, so
Yeah.
but I just thought I'd confirm. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, Eve, I'm next, and I have a question. So Congo's getting a little bit more attention. Even in some of the Palestinian rallies I go to, people will point out, yeah, don't forget Congo, Sudan, which is great. But the thing I'm questioning in a lot of things that I read is that the figures I'm hearing now for number of people killed in DRC in the conflict of 5 to 6 million, they're the exact same figures I was citing 20 years ago, because I remember talking about this 20 years ago, and people were saying 5 to 6 million. Now, that can't have been true then and now, which makes me question, do we really have any idea about sort of the death rate in Congo, the number of people who've been killed?
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with you. There was a I don't think it was a UN report. I think it was like one of the big humanitarian groups that put out a figure, 2008-ish, 2000, whatever, 3.5 million, 4 million, I think was kind of range of the figure. And that was widely reported. Yeah, I would say I wouldn't put too much trust in that figure. Now, and the other part to it is always the question of how the deaths are taking place, right? That's excess mortality based upon the impact of the conflict. It's not just direct killings, right? It's the excess mortality. So those kind of things are, important to kind of tease out and to understand. I think there's no doubt. I mean, the UN a long time ago reported that it was basically genocidal what Kagame's forces were doing in Eastern Congo. There's no way of whatever the exact number is, the level of violence is absolutely stunning. And this has now been going on for basically 30 years. Ebbs and flows. So I think that the Congo one, I think that also with the Congo, I'm a little hesitant, a little ambivalent about how a lot of the framing of the violence in the Congo, it kind of hones in on getting these resources that are used in technology products versus more of the geopolitical question of how we have directly backed Kagame, the RPF, M23, and their predecessors in the violence. And that, to me, the link is much more odious than the kind of more generalized, we're just trying to get the cobalt, and the cobalt is so I think that that's another part to how some of that framing is done. Because if you trace it out, right, I mean, Kagame is a creation. There really is no other way to look at it. Kagame is a creation of Anglosphere policy, right? There is no way in the world they would be able to pull off the current policy, but specifically the two marches on Kinshasa without substantive military assistance, diplomatic cover, et cetera. But yeah, I don't know the number, but the numbers are definitely horrible. And the recent numbers about how many displaced, right? There, hundreds of thousands. I think we're probably on more solid terrain with displaced, because there's actually, as I understand it, it would be like camps and UN staff and whatever, tabulating how many people are actually displaced. And it's hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people have been displaced over a new phase of displacement over the past, whatever it has been now, a year and a bit since the M23 rekindled significant fighting.
When you say the Anglosphere, Eve, are you also referring beyond that to also NATO, or are you just saying it's
No.
former Anglo? Just no.
Anglo, I'm meaning UK, Canada,
Mhm.
and the US, and there was division with France. France was not on board, right? The whole business about how France supported the genocide, that's how it's framed, is there was actual geopolitical conflict between Washington and Paris in the 90s over Rwanda specifically. And I mean, the claim that Robin Philpott puts forward in his book on this is the reason why Romeo Dallaire is sent to lead the military mission is because you need a French speaker, right? Because it was a Belgian colony, and it's, French is not the main language, but a major secondary language. And so the US, that doesn't want somebody who's from a country that's under French influence, like the Cameroon or other African, French sphere countries, what country do we have a lot of influence with that has French speakers? Well, Canada being obvious main country. And so that the Dallaire is chosen. It's basically the Washington wants Dallaire to serve this geopolitical function in this battle between Paris and Washington that's taking place after the collapse of the Soviet Union. The U.S. is sort of moving away from just accepting French influence across the continent and saying, hey, we're sort of basically pushing more into French dominated areas. And I think that makes sense. I think that's part of what happened. I think I think Philpott might exaggerate it a little bit, but but I think that is a dynamic that played out. I mean, the concrete thing, right? Like one of the things that Kagame did, he's made English the second language, right? That was very concrete, and that has two elements. As a geopolitical element, has an internal element because he was part of the Tutsis that were exiled in 59 and 61. They went to Uganda, of course, where English was so he doesn't really speak much French. I don't know if he speaks any French, but his second language is English. And so it benefits them. And the schools have been now increasingly English is taught in Rwanda and whatever. So language has been a dynamic within this. Yeah. So yes, the Anglosphere definitely.
I think we can close now. That's all the questions, Eve.
Cool. Thanks everyone. Same place, same time next week.
Thank you. Bye.